20 years ago, now is not only mainstream, you're hearing it from the bully pulpit of the president himself. Essentially, this argument that I'm here to clean up the system, I'm here to drain and to weaken and push back against the deep state. So that's very much along those lines. Of course, if you look at this peak for the Federal Bureau of Investigation,
Yes.
right? If you look at this peak for a lot of top positions, of course, even previous peak for the Department of Justice, but even the latest one speak for the Department of Justice. Clearly, the MAGA versus establishment deep state narrative is very much there. So again, I need to clarify when I say subdued, it was more the manner and avoidance of certain incendiary language. But I think the content was very consistent, not to mention also consistent with this very strong immigration.
Yes.
Right? It just declared immigration essentially an emergency on the border of America and the South. I made the massive influx of millions of illegal immigrants, and he made it clear that he's gonna stick to the Remain in Mexico plan that he negotiated during his first term. So that was quite interesting for me. Nevertheless, of course, this is gonna be. I'm not gonna. Well, you could say there are elements of unity here, right?
Oh,
Because
yeah.
on one hand, we just had a confirmation of a perfect vote for Marco Rubio to be the next Secretary of State, and Marco Rubio obviously is, well, as far as foreign policy, republicanism is concerned, quite traditional, right?
Yeah.
It's tough on China, tough on Russia, friendly and supportive of allies and friends. He got, I think, 99 to 0 votes because he's a senator. Of course, maybe that helped. But he said everything right during his confirmation hearing, if you really followed him. But at the same time, you have people like Elon Musk, right, who are trying to cut a deal with TikTok. And I think one of the things that caught the attention of everyone was the TikTok CEO there, right, and having his very proud moment, right. I don't know if that was a accidental picture, but he was kind of looking like a snooty one next to, of course, the incoming Tulsi Gabbard, the incoming National Director for Intelligence, which some people were trying to interpret. Does this mean anything? No, because the thing is, there are contradictory streams within this MAGA 2.0 of Trump. There's this very tough anti-China stance you're hearing from Marco Rubio of the rest, and at the same time, you're also hearing these elements of friendliness towards China, including what Donald Trump said. But going back to your question, you have an RFK Jr. in your cabinet, right? Who has been a bastion of, alternative theories about reality. So the other thing we also see with the MAGA movement, and as I said, it's this embrace of the kind of a deep state conspiracy theories and sometimes actual conspiracy,
Yeah.
because life also has actual conspiracy. So I think this is also Trump's way of saying, I'm not only going to go after people who had a witch hunt against me, I'm also going to go after people who try to cover the truth from the American people and the world. So again, it's a very anti-establishment, anti-system messaging, except presented in a far more subdued manner than we're used to when it comes to Donald Trump.
Right. A lot of people have said that during the Biden administration, the country or the U.S. have become too far left. And right now, ang concern naman nila, it's the country, the U.S. under the Trump administration will become too far right. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think when it comes to cultural issues, identity politics, and so-called woke stuff, indeed, America significantly moved towards the left of the center, right? Not as far as European countries. I mean, if I were to use European countries as a yardstick, the U.S. is still a very much centrist, conservative country. But I think on the economic issue, the U.S. did not move as far to the left as many people say. The U.S. healthcare system is not still fully socialized like neighboring Canada. It's incomparable to what you see in Germany, never mind Scandinavia. If you look at America's minimum wage situation across many states, if you look at the conditions of labor, among other things, America is still a very much, in my opinion, libertarian capitalist system compared to much more socialized system you see in much of European Union, and of course in neighboring Canada, not to mention New Zealand and even Australia. So I don't buy the argument that the U.S. has moved to the left on economic issues in as much as the conservatives put it. But yes, I think as on the cultural front, identity politics front, right? Indeed, I think many Americans felt things are moving so much to the left, or at least they're not comfortable with. And I got this from conversation with folks in America, from South Carolina to Georgia to DC to California. So, including Republicans, obviously, in California. I've been talking to folks throughout the year, and indeed, there's a sense that maybe the cultural issues are a little bit too fast for a lot of folks
Right.
to absorb. But are we moving? Are we going to move towards far right? Well, I think on issues like, for instance, deregulation, I think the Trump 2.0 administration will be very strong in
Yeah.
deregulating. As we speak, he has announced that the U.S. will withdraw from the Paris Agreement.
Yes.
This is the climate change agreement. This is the green agenda
Yeah.
that the Democrats have been very invested in. He barely mentioned climate change. Perhaps it's one of the reasons why he had to do this indoor and not outside, because some would say perhaps what we're seeing, the extreme weather conditions in one way or another, is affected by climate change. So I think on the regulation, the U.S. is going to move way to the right. And you are going to see reversals of a lot of green technology, moves by the former administrations, particularly the Democratic administration of Biden and Obama. I think on the cultural part, it will be very contested, but nevertheless, of course, a lot of federal funding for some so-called controversial
Right.
education programs, that have to do, critical race theory, or
Right.
revisionist theory, maybe on those things. But what for me really is the big question is, does a second Trump administration also means moving to the right in terms of undermining checks and balances, meaning moving towards a much more authoritarian populist system that we saw in other countries, like most notably in Hungary, right, under Viktor Orban, who has been hailed as one of the heroes of the MAGA movement. In fact, I think Orban was invited, the Hungarian. So there were like only a half a dozen or so foreign leaders who were invited. I know many in the Philippines. We'll talk about Philippines and made an issue that
Later.
BBM was not invited. Actually, very konti
Yeah.
lang invited. Giorgia Meloni, the post-fascist or new conservative alt-right party in Italy representative. You had Milei, of course, another libertarian conservative from Argentina. And then the Hungarian leaders, a couple of them were invited, and I think that the 2 or 3 of them showed up, including the Argentinian
Right.
and the Italian leader last time I checked. So
Okay.
if go back to it, for me, that's a big question. Is the U.S. also going to move way to the right in terms of, I mean, there are some crazy theories I'm hearing, like, Yarvin, one of the theorists in the conservative movements, talk
Yeah.
about creating kind of a modern monarchy or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Why is this important? Because look at the TikTok debate, right? The TikTok issue is very important. Just over the past 48 hours, we don't know what on earth is going to happen with the TikTok situation, because TikTok, there was a law that was passed, bipartisan, went to the Supreme Court, got cleared, and then based on that law, the only reason you'll give a reprieve to the ban before the ban takes effect is if there's a significant indication of a change in the position of
Investments.
ByteDance,
Yeah.
the mother company. I am yet to hear that significant change in position, meaning are they offering this, meaning they're willing to give up their data centers to America and not keeping in China. I'm still not hearing any evidence of that. And Tim Cotton, Senator Cotton, who's a Republican senator, he said that actually there's no more point in a reprieve because the ban has already been effectuated.
Right,
We're
right.
past, but nevertheless, it's still possible for Trump to push an executive agreement that could almost supersede both the Supreme Court and the legislature, both of which are controlled by conservatives. So we are in some gray zone. So that's the thing that I'm going to look at. But obviously on immigration, America's going to move way to
Way
the
to
right,
right.
right?
Okay.
On the regulation, including Bitcoin, digital currency, environmental regulation, it's going to move way to the right, at least compared to not only U.S.
Yeah.
under Democrats, but also much of the Western or OECD countries.
Now, Richard, hold your thoughts. We have a lot of questions for you. But for the meantime, let me just read this. Trump pledged to rescue America from what he described as years of betrayal and decline. Now, Trump said, quote, "From this moment on, America's decline is over." His half-hour speech echoed some of the themes he sounded at his first inauguration in 2017, when he spoke of the American carnage of crime and job loss that he said had ravaged the country. The president also talked about the assassination attempts against him, saying he was, quote, "saved by God to make America great again." The inauguration completes a triumphant return for Trump, who was impeached twice, survived 2 assassination attempts, and was convicted in a criminal trial.
From this moment on, America's decline is over. Our liberties and our nation's glorious destiny will no longer be denied, and we will immediately restore the integrity, competency, and loyalty of America's government. The golden age of America begins right now. From this day forward, our country will flourish and be respected again all over the world.
President Donald Trump also emphasized peace efforts between Israel and Gaza, stating his goal of becoming a peacemaker. The newly sworn-in president received applause from his predecessor, former President Joe Biden, when he mentioned the release of hostages in the Middle East.
My proudest legacy will be that of a peacemaker and unifier. That's what I want to be, a peacemaker and a unifier. I'm pleased to say that as of yesterday, one day before I assumed office, the hostages in the Middle East are coming back home to their families. Thank you. America will reclaim its rightful place as the greatest, most powerful, most respected nation on earth, inspiring the awe and admiration of the entire world.
Richard,
Okay.
So the Trump administration has taken credit on the recently approved ceasefire deal in Gaza. So what do you think, how much effort or work has he put in before it was approved?
Well, I mean, this deal technically was the same deal that was
I know.
offered by Biden 7, 8, 9, 10 months ago. So this was not a new deal. The only thing that made it new are, of course, the changed circumstances in the Middle East. Of course, the military operations that, according to Israel, have been successful over the past few months in terms of degrading the capability of their nemesis and rivals, not to mention the fall of the Assad regime in Syria. But more important, I would say, is because Donald Trump, unlike Biden or the Democrats, I would say, he knows how to remind everyone who is the superpower, right? In fact, that was the complaint of Bill Clinton back in the day when he was dealing with some unruly allies. He said,
right.
who is the superpower here, right? Donald Trump knows to remind everyone, when you deal with me, I am the president of the superpower of the world. So I think that was absolutely clear to the Israelis. And here you could see the U.S. has tremendous amount of leverage over Israel. More than 70% of the weapon systems that were used in Gaza operations over the past 15 months were tax funded by the American people. The United States remains as the major arbiter of peace and order in the Middle East. So when Trump sent his envoy to Israel, that person made it clear, you're gonna make it sure that when Trump takes over, things are gonna look nicer than how they are, and we don't want any distraction from his amazing inauguration to come. So it works. I mean, that's just the reality of our era. When you deal with strong-willed leaders, including leaders of allied nations or rivals like Putin or Xi Jinping or whatnot, sometimes having someone like Trump who knows who's the superpower does work.
Yeah. Richard, during the campaign of President Donald Trump, he mentioned lengthily about de-escalating all sorts of tensions in the Middle East, and Israel was mentioned, among other things. Now that he has this peace deal in place, how long do you think this ceasefire will hold between Hamas and Israel? And do you think President Donald Trump will be able to broker a deal, a lengthy deal that will hold longer for both sides?
Well, as far as the Middle East is concerned, there are many moving parts here, right? First of all, it's the Israeli politics itself. I think last time I checked, Ben Gavir, I think if Smotrich and a couple of more alt-right, far-right members of Netanyahu's cabinet in protest, they walked out of the cabinet. So at the end of the day, Netanyahu is a politician. He wants to survive. So let's see what is his next game when it comes to his politics. My understanding is that the text of the ceasefire agreement is flexible enough to give operational dexterity to the Israelis if they feel that they have to go back into a kind of an offensive operation again in the coming weeks and months. So no, there's absolutely no guarantee that this ceasefire agreement will hold and be fully effectuated for months to come, because the domestic politics of Israel itself is up in the air. But I think as far as the Middle East is concerned, there are many moving parts. One is what's Trump going to do with the new Syrian administration, because the Syrian regime is now led by HTS, the leader of which al-Shara, the Golani, used to be a former Al-Qaeda member, right? How are you going to deal with them? And then, of course, the Iranians are also sending a signal of openness to dialogue and a peaceful, negotiation over their nuclear program. Will Trump do what Nixon did in the 1970s? As you know, of course, again, going back to history, Richard Nixon, because he was known as a tough guy, and of course he was accompanied by a smart diplomat like Henry Kissinger,
Yes, that's right.
they were able to bring China out of the cold and eventually cut a deal, and no one could accuse Richard Nixon of being weak. So Trump's kind of tough man, at least persona, and being a Republican in many ways, and the Republicans controlling both Senate and Congress, I think gives him tremendous amount of leeway to potentially negotiate a lasting peace deal with the Iranians, and that will be part and parcel of any major deal to bring stability in the Middle East. Otherwise, I really cannot see how the Middle East could be stable anytime soon, unless the major power there, Iran and the United States, come to some sort of understanding, which obviously will be opposed by many, and depending on what version comes out, including potentially the Israelis. But on the global level, I think Donald Trump at once, this is where we see doublespeak, right? He's very good in that. At once, he's saying all of these good things about China, right? All of these things that, I culture, and he correctly calls Xi Jinping chairman, because Xi Jinping is not just the president, he is the paramount leader. Chairman Xi Jinping. He invited Chairman Xi Jinping to the inauguration. He's saying all of these good things. He wants to cut a deal on TikTok, but at the end of the day, the people who run everyday defense and foreign policy of America are Marco Rubio, Elbridge Colby, Hagsett, who are all known as people who see China as the #1 threat to the United States, right? So I can see many permutations here. Some theories would say that maybe Trump will try to cut a deal with Russia and the Iranians so that he makes sure China is isolated, so that those three powers are not together. Kind of like what Nixon did, right? When he took out the Chinese from the Sino-Soviet kind of axis back in the Cold War days. Some are saying that, China is just so economically important. It will be a different deal with them because they're so powerful militarily, and maybe Taiwan is not as important to Trump, but Trump will be tougher on Iran, or probably even tough on Russia, because Zelensky and Macron were successful enough in convincing him to. So I can see a million permutations here. So I think if anyone pretends to know what exactly Trump is going to do, I don't think they know what they're talking about. Because if there's one thing that is consistent about Trump, is a degree of unpredictability that sometimes is intentional, but sometimes it's just temperamental.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So the only thing we can really think about is who are the people he puts in position of power. And when you look at Marco Rubio, we look at the Pete Hegseth, we look at the top policy guys, they're very China hawks, and they want the U.S. to primarily focus on our region. So actually, yes, they're good news for us in the Philippines, because we want to focus on China. China is the #1 threat to the rules-based international order, at least from a Filipino perspective, at least from a Taiwan perspective, and a West Philippine Sea disputes perspective.
Yeah, Richard, before we move forward very quickly, let's bring in Steve Witkoff. He's a key figure in sealing the deal. So what are your thoughts on that? Because President Donald Trump and Steve was supposedly, they play together. He's a real estate developer. So what are your thoughts on bringing this man in the picture with regards to the Gaza deal, ceasefire deal?
Yeah, I mean, it's a billionaires club, right? If you look at the cabinet of Trump, Bernie Sanders, the progressive senator, openly is calling it the oligarchy.
Yeah.
Some are calling it new feudalism, right? Which is quite interesting, because Trump ran as the guy who will save, poorer Americans from, illegal immigration and inflation, etc. But if you look at it, this is the most billionaire cabinet probably anywhere in the world. That says a lot. No, I mean, Donald Trump is really known for someone who prioritizes two things: loyalty and rapport, right? So if he feels you, if he thinks you got what it takes, and at the same time he feels you're loyal, you share his worldview, he's going to put you in positions of influence, including being a special envoy to the Middle East and dealing with this very sensitive Gaza issue.
Right.
And you can see, this real estate people are not experts on international law or Middle East politics, etc., but they get things done because they know the fundamental truth, which is who's the superpower, right?
Yeah.
And they work accordingly. And I think that was the problem with the Biden administration. Too many supposedly smart people there who are really weak in negotiation. They knew a lot about the world, but they didn't know about the fundamental thing, which was they're representing the world's superpower. So when they did it with allies, they didn't come off as decisive. Now, one Republican senator, this is Lindsey Graham, at least according to the by Bob Woodward, said if you look at the Mar-a-Lago, it's more like a North Korean court or something like that. So it's like, Trump is the supreme leader, right? And everyone is clapping for him and everyone wants to be on his good side. And for Trump, the number one thing is loyalty. And of course, rapport has to be there. So again, let's not be surprised if a couple of interesting characters end up doing very sensitive job. Elon Musk, as we speak, we have to get back to him because he's very, very important person.
We'll talk about him later on.
Elon Musk is, of course, he's a very important person on technical level because 50-60% of satellites up there are owned by Elon Musk.
That's right.
And that should increase unless Jeff Bezos and the rest catch up. And the Chinese, obviously, Russians and others. But it's also because, he has a kind of a de facto diplomat role.
All right,
from what we understand, he has been having conversation with multiple countries, including allegedly, there was a New York Times report that he is in conversation with the Iranian mission in the United Nations. Obviously, when it comes to Elon Musk, he has a lot of investments in China. I was just in Tesla here in Makati, BGC, the other day, and all of our Teslas here come from Shanghai. Right? So any Tesla you see here in Asia comes from Shanghai. So he is deeply invested in the Chinese market and production facilities, right?
Okay.
And at times he said he might not allow the Taiwanese, for instance, or Americans use SpaceX, SpaceX satellites if ever there's a war with China. He had a meeting with the Chinese top leadership, the premier of China, just a few months ago. And as we understand, he also has a good rapport with Vladimir Putin. And the Kremlin elite, some people he has been talking to over the past few years, and there were times that he didn't allow the Ukrainians to use his satellite technology, and he essentially intervened and interfered and dictated the terms of or tempo of the conflict in Ukraine. So Elon Musk is an unprecedented figure. This is a billionaire, richest man in the world who has no qualms whatsoever to leverage his economic and financial and technological power into geopolitical and diplomatic power. Because he's born, of course, in South Africa, he can never become an American president, right? He's not a naturally born American. But some are saying he's positioning himself as a parallel president, not only as a parallel pillar of diplomacy, which to me, kind of, parang uniteam. I see a uniteam dynamic brewing, and let's see how long this will last.
I know. We'll talk about more Elon Musk later on, but during his inaugural speech, President Donald Trump expressed gratitude to the Black and Hispanic communities for their support. Now, he vowed that his administration would make Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream a reality.
To the Black and Hispanic communities, I want to thank you for the tremendous outpouring of love and trust that you have shown me with your vote. We set records, and I will not forget it. I've heard your voices in the campaign, and I look forward to working with you in the years to come. Today is Martin Luther King Day, and his honor, this will be a great honor, but in his honor we will strive together to make his dream a reality. We will make his dream come true.
Richard, one of the posturing that I saw from Donald Trump was he's trying to position himself as a person against racism. Truth be told, in his speech, he mentioned about their government will be colorblind and instead will be merit-based. And he has sayings like he will make Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream a reality. He's going to declassify the assassination attempt of Martin Luther King. Now, what is your take on all of a sudden from being tagged as a bigot, now he's transitioning into somebody who is against systematic racism?
Well, I mean, Donald Trump always denied that he was a racist, right? He's a very good friend of, African-American top celebrities, whether it's 50 Cent, Kanye West, among others. I think it was with Kanye West when he first declared that he's going to run for the presidency back in the day. So, he always claimed that, he's a big fighter for for a more racially just America. But the reality is that, of course, he stands against all of this kind of critical race theory, all of this educational curriculum, innovations over the past few years that try to shed light on the dark past of America. Because let's not forget, America was one of the biggest operators of slave plantations way into modernity, right?
That's right,
Much
that's
of
right.
American capitalism was built on the toils of millions and millions of slave workers way into the 18th century, and some would say beyond. So, and eventually they had a civil war to address that. For me, Donald Trump is someone who's gonna always try to say he's a transcendental leader. He's gonna, but for me, it was more of a gratitude for the demographic shift we saw
Yes, that's
in
right.
latest elections. Because if you listen to punditry and experts 10 years ago, in fact, if you read the post-mortem of the Republican Party after Romney lost to Obama in 2012, their fundamental argument was that demography was against the Republican Party, right? The Republican Party was nothing but a shrinking party of mostly Caucasian, quote-unquote, white Americans.
that's right.
That minorities would all go to the Democrats, and the idea was that, okay, the best we can do is just to win the low participation races in the Congress, whatever, and then good luck na lang sa presidential race. And then Donald Trump came and completely changed the game, and we saw that in the latest elections, right? That was a game changer because as not majority, let's just be clear, still the majority of African Americans, male and female, and also Latinos still vote for Democrats. The same thing with Filipino Americans. I don't know, I think there are more Filipinos pro-Trump than Filipino Americans.
Seems like it, yeah.
The number, the small number that used to vote for Republicans has significantly expanded. And in fact, there are two demographics that work very well for Trump. That's why he won practically all battleground states. Is first the male African Americans and definitely male Latinos. He did very well with them compared to expectations for a Republican candidate. But more importantly, also among Gen Z African Americans and younger people of minority background, because these people were very much hurt by inflation. You see, inflation really hurt a lot of young people. And I would say this is where we also have to give credit to Donald Trump's youngest son, right?
Byron.
Who's a teenager studying in NYU, smart kid, studying business. He understands the psyche of the younger generation. I think he played a very important role in convincing his dad to do all the podcasts across America, all the big podcasts.
That's true.
That was the influence of Barron. I think Barron was the de facto kind of youth outreach strategist of Trump. He's also launching now Bitcoins, I think, for his mom and dad and all of that. So that's where I think he did very well. And I think if you're Donald Trump, you'll say, well, if I were a racist and bigot, why are all these folks from minority backgrounds voting for me? So he feels vindicated by that. But I think to say that he's a man who will continue the legacy of Martin Luther King, I'm sure a lot of people will raise their eyebrows, especially from the other side of this fence.
Yeah. And right after saying that, he said, as of today, it will henceforth be the official policy of the United States government that there are only two genders, male and female. Right?
Well, that's actually where also America is moving to the right, no? On the religious front. One of the things that we see with the not only Trump administration, but the MAGA movement is the growing influence of conservative Catholicism. The vice president is a convert to Catholicism, a very proud Catholic, right? If you see a lot of big influencers, right, within the MAGA movement and also the Trump administration, a lot of them have Catholic leanings. The Supreme Court, by the way, this is the most Catholic Supreme Court, I think, in American history or recent history. And of course, Donald Trump, during his campaign, and of course during his inauguration, spoke in ways that you haven't heard for a long time from Western leaders, right? Essentially an expression of religiosity. He mentioned how God saved him and that he feels there's this mission. I won't say messianic sense, but definitely, I think, to be fair to Trump, some people who talk to him in private would also say that he somehow changed after at least the first assassination attempt. Somehow noticed that perhaps there is the burden of history on his shoulders. Now, I'm not his pastor or I'm not his religious spiritual leader, but I won't discount that a part of Donald Trump that is going to be different from the previous iteration is that this is going to be a much more religiously oriented, if not Catholic oriented president, considering the importance of the Catholic movement and Catholic converts within the conservative and MAGA movement in recent years. So yes, America will move to the right in a sense that you're going to see more explicit expression of religiosity, Christian religiosity, Catholic religiosity by America's top leaders. And some would argue that we already see a reflection of that in the Supreme Court rulings, right? That you could perhaps see the Catholic, values of some of the justices also reflected in some of the important rulings in recent years by the Supreme Court. So this is fascinating, right? Because again, 10, 15 years ago, remember, was it 2014, 15 when the same-sex union was finalized by the Supreme Court? If you look at the pundits, things they were saying from 2012 when Romney lost, and then now you look at 2025, it looks like we're in a completely different universe.
Yeah.
That's why I'm calling it the age of disruption. On every front, we're seeing complete, essentially, undermining of a lot of long-held received wisdom. And I think we're indeed entering a completely new era, not only in American politics, but in global politics.
So much issues to discuss, but we are just getting started. Our special coverage of the inauguration of U.S. President Donald Trump continues after a short break. Keep it here on One News. Good morning. You're still watching Brunch here on One News,
Yes.
our special coverage for the 47th U.S. President inauguration.
Which is Donald
Stay
J.
tuned.
Trump. This is his second time as president.
Yes.
Pero hindi siya back-to-back because in between, Biden became president. He just reclaimed now his throne.
Yes, that's right. Okay, so the inauguration was held earlier. It's actually 11 or 12.
Ang dami na nga nangyari, but he signed several executive orders already. And he already ditched a lot of executive orders from Joe Biden. In essence, 77 or 78 na rescission orders. So,
Mamaya, isa-isahin natin yan. But former U.S. presidents were in attendance as Donald Trump was sworn in as the 47th President of the United States. Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, and George W. Bush witnessed Trump's inauguration at the U.S. Capitol Rotunda in Washington, D.C. Accompanying them were former First Ladies Hillary Clinton and Laura Bush. Meanwhile, Michelle Obama skipped the ceremony. Former President Joe Biden also attended Trump's inauguration. In a farewell speech, Biden said, quote, "We're leaving the office, but we're not leaving the fight."
You know, but the point I want to make today is to make clear my farewell address, as we all do have we have a lot more to do. We heard the inaugural address today. You know, we got a lot more to do. I know from many years of experience, they're up and down, but we have to stay with it. My dad taught me the measure of a person, you heard me say it before, is how quickly they get back up when they get knocked down. That's what we have to do right now. And we've always done our best as Americans. We never, never, never give up. Never. We're leaving office, but we're not leaving the fight. You're smart, you're skilled, you're passionate. The country needs you again. So all of you can, stay engaged in all the ways you can. Whether it's in public service, or the private sector, or philanthropy, academia, running for office yourself, or anything else you choose to do. I give you my word, we believe in you. We, Jill and I, our family, believe in you.
Trump was sworn in the presence of notable politicians and also tech billionaires. His guest list included Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, and Apple leader Tim Cook, who took prime seats at St. John's Church. The guests witnessed Trump take the oath of office. Musk, the CEO of SpaceX and Tesla, revved up a crowd of Trump supporters at an inaugural rally in Washington. He spent hundreds of millions of dollars to help Trump get elected and has been appointed by him to co-lead an unofficial Department of Government Efficiency.
This is what victory feels like. Yeah!
Elections, they come and go. Some elections are, important, some are not. But this one, this one really mattered. And I just want to say thank you for making it happen. It is thanks to you that the future of civilization is assured.
Yeah.
All right,
So we have,
Let's
go
bring
ahead.
back in Richard to join us in the conversation. Very interesting and animated.
Ayun na inaantay mo, si Elon Musk.
Richard, we have to talk about Elon Musk for a bit now before we talk about the other things. Now, one of the things that Trump is trying to push for is the cancellation or the end of birthright citizenship.
Yes.
You were mentioning that he can never be president, si Elon Musk, because he is from South African descent. Now, do you think this is connected with Trump's attempt to probably grooming Elon Musk to be the next president? Paving the way,
I don't know.
kumbaga.
You can
Paving the
ask
way.
There could be a lot of wild theories. What is? I'm sure the more folks from Democratic persuasion will say that this was more a way of racializing, right? Or putting some sort of a category on who is truly American or not, or at least, unfortunately, that's how it has been interpreted by certain quarters. So I think Vivek Ramaswamy, for instance, and Elon Musk, when they got into some debates over visas for high-end immigrant workers, you saw the kind of almost racialized debate that and floodgates that it opened within the MAGA movement. And that's why I said this could be like a unity team. So let's see how this is going to evolve in the coming days and weeks or so. But yeah, I mean, you can always come up with some conspiracy theory that, if Elon Musk is really as influential as some people think, he'll eventually push, Trump, but eventually has to push also the Congress.
That's right.
And ultimately the Supreme Court, right, to make some fundamental changes that would allow someone of him who's foreign-born to become American president. I think that's a bit far-fetched.
But Richard, the reason why I asked you this is because, well, we know Elon Musk is part of an unofficial role as Department of Government Efficiency, which is clearly not defined what that role is about. But if you take a look at the word government efficiency, it's like a QA, like Quality Assurance Department of a call center, that he oversees all the departments run efficiently. Now, do you think this is similar to that of an executive secretary that he, if and when President Trump becomes too old in a couple of years, he'll be calling the shots?
Well, there's a vice president there. Let's not
naman.
forget. I mean, it's
J.D.
like,
Vance.
Yeah, but you have to remember, Richard,
understand,
Elon is the billionaire.
Yeah, but I mean, the vice president also made a ton of money as a venture capitalist, and he's a good friend of Thiel, who's also
that's right.
the PayPal mafia boy. So I mean, it's I mean, again, I think some people have been too dismissive of the vice president. I think he's someone who could also play an influential role in the years to come. Now, first of all, there's a technical reason, perhaps, that the Doge, I mean, after that coin thing,
Yes.
this organization, whatever, is because of conflict of interest, potential issues. So I think he cannot be fully part of the cabinet or something, because that could raise some conflict of interest issues. After all, SpaceX, among others, have huge contracts from the Pentagon, and he has been whining about federal regulations on when and how and where he's going to launch his spaceships, right? So I think that's why there's some sort of a fuzziness around the circumstances of the department, whatever you want to call it. And then I just found it weird that for an efficiency department, it has two heads. Like, isn't that so inefficient that you have dalawa yung boss mo sa isang, you know? So anyway, putting that aside, I mean, initially, if you look at their plans, they wanted to cut down of the fiscal budget deficit, and also cut down jobs in massive numbers. But if you look at the latest numbers that are coming out, latest estimates are coming out, are much more realistic, because I think there's an understanding that there's going to be a lot of institutional resistance from within, potentially even from other Republicans, on cutting down jobs for federal employees and cutting down expenditures. I mean, U.S. military spending is like crazy, right?
Yeah.
So if you're going to cut down on other issues, some people are going to make an issue out of that, right? Especially if part of that
Richard, you
spending,
mentioned U.S. military spending.
Aid to allies and friends.
That's very interesting. You mentioned U.S. military spending, because in his several conversations he's had prior to this inauguration, he's talking about ramping up spending for the U.S. And not touching them in terms of downsizing. Let me rephrase. Right-sizing. Every other department will be right-sized except the U.S. military. Now, is this part of the positioning? Is this part of all the positioning for the Middle East and China?
I mean, this was always the thing, even with Reagan, right? So we started this conversation going back to the address by Reagan in 1985. I mean, this thing about, we want to be a small government, but at the same time, we have a huge military-industrial complex, right? And if you're Elon Musk, who has spaceships that could be used by Pentagon for operations, high-end operations, communications related operations, and potentially an all-out war with a very sophisticated adversary, then there's a conflict of interest there. So
That's right.
For me, Elon Musk is really the wild card when it comes to geopolitics, not only American foreign policy. So talking to diplomats from all around the world, Elon Musk keeps on popping up. Everyone is wondering, what is his exact role? How much is he empowered? And to what degree is Elon Musk doing things in coordination with Donald Trump or not? If you saw the cover of the New Yorker magazine the other day, it shows like, mag-inaugurate ka na, diba? Something it's like Elon Musk takes it and then like Trump is on the side. So the last time we saw something like that, it didn't end up very well for the non-elected person. I'm talking about Steve Bannon, right? If you remember, Steve Bannon was on Time Magazine's front page very early on, and Steve Bannon was getting all the credit for making a broken campaign into something transformational. Next thing you know, he was out, right? So people are wondering, what makes Elon Musk more influential than Bannon, aside from the fact that he has $400 billion to his name and, of course, 200 million followers to his name,
but
right?
We'll just have to wait and see.
After Richard,
wait and see if Elon Musk has the emotional quotient.
Let's see the
Yeah.
100 days. Let's see after the 100 days, kamusta na ang relasyon nila? Is it, pasabi mo nga, unity team part 2 ba
Yes,
ito?
tingnan
But
natin.
let's talk about that later muna.
Yeah,
Angel.
Maybe
Go
we
ahead.
can launch a Bitcoin about how many days Elon Musk will last, or this MAGA movement will hold together. Right?
All right. The relationship between the Philippines and the United States is deeply rooted in history, with both countries sharing strong political, economic, and military ties. In recent years, the partnership has evolved, focusing on mutual security concerns in the Indo-Pacific region. This collaboration is reinforced through joint military exercises, defense agreements like the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, or EDCA, and shared commitments to uphold international law in the South China Sea. Now, President Bongbong Marcos has expressed optimism that the Philippines will continue to sustain and strengthen its ties with the U.S. under President Donald Trump's leadership. Yun.
Richard, we're transitioning to this China issue. Now, President Trump mentioned kanina yung Panama Canal and how he built it for Panama, and now China is operating inside the canal. So one of his rhetorics again. Now, do we see, in terms of the Philippine relationship, based on the way Trump is talking and blaming China for everything, do we see more pressure put on China, which will be beneficial to us?
Well, I mean, again, we have to be very honest about it. Trump's own mind is indecipherable. He's sounding very conciliatory towards China. He's been over conciliatory towards TikTok. So some of our friends, including Duterte supporters in the Philippines, have been making a lot out of that. Remember that news about supposedly naimbita daw si Sara, tapos hindi daw naimbita si BBM or whatever. There's some folks in the Philippines who are politically invested in a certain very dodgy narrative that Trump is going to be nice to China and is going to throw BBM under the bus because BBM was buddy of Biden, forgetting that actually Imelda was a buddy of Trump well before Duterte even emerged in the imagination of Duterte. So there are a lot of mumbo jumbo analysis along those lines. Again, as I said, what we know here is that the people are going to run American foreign policy on a day-to-day basis. Marco Rubio, Elbridge Colby, a lot of people that we are very familiar with here in the Philippines. A lot of us have had conversations with, exchanges with. These are people who are not only traditionally minded, but they're also forward-looking in a sense that they recognize the U.S. has to help frontline states. Some of the important think tanks will play an important role in this administration are, for instance, the Heritage Foundation, right? They had a new report recently that said the U.S. has to give Philippines better weapon systems, including the F-16 fighters, among other things. So we're hearing a lot of positive signals from this incoming Republican administration in terms of helping frontline states. If Taiwan is a potentially Ukraine of Asia, then the Philippines is the Poland of Asia. It's just a country in line, but it could be a very powerful country, very capable country, and a very self-assured middle power, just in the same way Poland is, not only in Eastern Europe, but within the NATO alliance. So I think there is a lot of reason to think that on a day-to-day basis, in terms of actual detailed minutiae plans, the Trump administration will be much more forthcoming in helping the Philippines on the China question. And that at the same time, of course, it will help the Philippines more. But in exchange, of course, it may also ask the Philippines to do more in terms of contributing to the Taiwan contingency plans, in terms of allowing more American weapons, HIMARS or Typhoon missile systems to be mobilized here. So nothing will come for free. So when I say they're tough on China, they want to help the Philippines, doesn't mean that the Philippines just can do whatever it wants. No.
Richard,
so where things are going to be tricky.
Richard, Trump mentioned in his speech about building the American Iron Dome system, which will be American-made. Now, he never said that he would make it specifically just for the U.S. Possibly ba, can the Philippines benefit, maambunan tayo ng that American Iron Dome system na mailagay sa atin? Kasi now, we have the Typhoon system in our own soil.
Well, there have been plans of the X-band system, essentially from Japan, first island chain, no? You can start from Japan.
I think we have the Iranian system, di ba? We have the Iranian system coming in also for the Philippines.
You mean the Israeli?
The Israeli system. Kasi, di ba?
Israeli,
yeah, that's right.
I think yes, but I think the most important plan here is that, essentially, THAAD missile system is also something else we're looking at. Because the Typhoon is an offensive system.
That's right.
It's hitting. But if you want defensive, it's more the THAAD system, which the South Koreans already have. I think the Japanese and Guam American forces are moving that direction. I think eventually one big plan could be a kind of an arc, right? A great wall of missile systems facing China.
Virtual,
So
parang virtually
China-
flexible.
Yeah, and for the Philippines, actually, that's the cheapest thing, di ba? Kasi napakamahalang submarines. It will take you billions and billions of dollars and years to develop submarines. Fighter jets are not cheap. Training for them will take years. But those missile systems could be deployed pretty efficiently and quickly. We saw that in the recent tit for tat missile launches in between Iran and Israel in the Middle East. So actually, it's very possible to see that in the coming years, that the Philippines' main discussion would be to get more of these missile systems based here, not to mention us also purchasing more BrahMos systems and more advanced hypersonic versions of that.
Yeah.
The Japanese. That's why the conversation is no longer just Philippines and US. It's trilateral. It's Japan, Philippine, US. Japan, Philippine, US with Korea, Australia, and India also in the wings. So yes, a kind of a great wall of missile systems seems to be the cheapest and most efficient way to get China's attention and to make invasion of Taiwan and invasion of mainland Philippines increasingly impossible, or at least highly costly for China. So yes, that's the deterrence game that we're looking at. So I think that's something that we're going to see doubling down on when it comes to the Trump 2.0 administration. Again, day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
Now, at the same time, obviously, no one knows with Trump. He wants to cut a grand bargain with China, whatever. That no one knows. I think there's no point in discussing something that is unknowable.
Yes,
but what
that's
is
true.
knowable is these things that we discussed so far.
But Richard, we have yet, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, we have yet to see or hear any statement released by Trump administration even before his first, the first term niya,
Yeah, first
in
term niya.
2017, about his stand on the West Philippine Sea.
Walang official stand. Except
diba?
kay Rubio lang.
Oo, walang ganon. So, what does this tell us?
Again, the point is we have to wait for the national defense strategy to come in. I mean, the last time you had the Trump 1.0 administration, Elbridge Colby is going to run the policy at the Pentagon, was one of the chief architects of that. What I'm going to wait for in the coming months or so, probably by next year, hopefully, at most, we have a new national defense strategy and national security strategy. There, we're going to have a very clear idea about where America stands in terms of the global picture. But one thing that we have seen over the past decade is tremendous amount of bipartisan continuity, right?
Yes.
So, I see this in my own interaction in DC over the past decade. In 2014-15, we were begging Americans to pay more attention to the Philippines, dilemma in the South China Sea. From 2016 onwards, Biden, Trump, and Trump 2.0, I think all of them agree that China is the primary strategic threat. But the devil is in the details, right? What are the methodologies? What are the initiatives? Those are the things that will come out. Of course, not the confidential parts, but the broad brushstrokes will come in the national defense strategy. So that's something we're going to look at. And of course, if there's going to be a new version of that compared to the 2018 one. And then, of course, there's going to be bilateral and trilateral dialogues between Philippines and U.S. and Philippine-US and Japan. Those ones are also things that we're going to look at. I think the Philippines could also come up with its own national security strategy in the near future. So I think what we have to all accept is that we are in a complete new era when it comes to geopolitical uncertainty. The Chinese are on the edge. The Russians are on the edge. We are on the edge, but I guess even the Americans are on the edge.
We're all on the edge with this presidency.
So on the edge should be our next show.
But we'll talk about it later on, Richard. I am sorry kasi medyo we're pressed for time, but I'd like to get your thoughts on this national emergency sa immigration. Quickly let us know kung ano yung pakay ni Trump by involving the military here and the National Guard by declaring the emergency. Does it make things easier to kick off yung immigration policies niya?
Well, again, I see all of your guests from the U.S. are lining up there, and someone also reminded us about Vivek withdrawing for the Doge. But I'm just saying, just for Vivek to be in the consideration together with Elon was ridiculous. But going back to this, no, this is going to be a massive operation. If you want to kick out 1 million people, right, or at least hundreds of thousands of people in your first 100 days, I mean, if you're listening to the Stephen Miller and some of these folks, who will oversee the immigration policy, this is going to be a whole-of-nation approach which will require massive mobilization of not only law enforcement, but potentially also the armed forces of the United States. For me, what is important right now, and I heard the same thing when I was in India, few weeks ago is that we have to negotiate with the Americans to make sure that the first waves of people who will be essentially kicked out of America, because a lot of people will be affected by this,
That's right.
will not be Filipinos, will not be Indian Americans, right? We have to leverage it. So these essentially the speculation is that the first migrants will be targeted are mostly from countries, I don't know, like Haiti, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Central American countries, or some of the
Yeah.
Latin American countries who are much more, let's just say, pliable or compliant or willing to work with the American administration. While probably the Filipino community, we were talking about hundreds of thousands, much bigger even for the Indian American community. That's a much larger community, and it could be much more geopolitically explosive if indeed America moves in that direction. But I'm 100% sure that in the first 100 days of the Trump 2.0 administration, the Stephen Miller types, they will make sure that the world knows they're serious about this, because I think just in the same way that the drug war
Yes,
was
that's right.
undergirding Duterte's, essentially it was the animating force of Duterte's 100 years in power. I think the immigration policy is going to be the animating force in the 100 days of Donald Trump administration. So I think we have to take his words almost literally, not just seriously, when it comes to the immigration issue. Just the scale of that, and which communities will be affected, let's see, because it's gonna be unprecedented. I don't think we have seen any country on the verge of conducting what the Republican new incoming administration
Right.
is signaling right now.
Yeah,
But
and-
I'm all ears for our guests from the U.S., who I'm sure
Yeah, well,
know much.
before you
this
leave,
issue.
Richard, as we speak, the border wall is being, as ordered by President Trump, immediately to be to resume. The word was resume construction again.
Well, I'm not sure it works with the cartels. Although he said that he's gonna. I don't know if you watched was that the Vin Diesel movie? Like they can make.
Yes, yes, under the wall,
guys.
under the wall. Yeah.
The wall is metaphorical, probably, right?
Yeah.
And
Oh my gosh.
now that the cartels have been designated as terrorist organization, I wonder also in terms of operational responses. Does that mean that the U.S. will conduct, I don't know, drone
As
attacks
such,
within
that's right.
Mexican territory?
Oh.
I mean, we can look at or in Colombia now I think
Richard,
even Costa Rica is
baka
yeah.
Trump can send the cartel leaders a picture of their houses like he does with the Taliban leaders, di ba? Shows them picture.
So because that's what we saw, right? Terrorist organization in the Middle East have been targeted with U.S. drones.
Yes.
Right? In violation of sovereignty of multiple countries, including allied countries like Pakistan. So does that mean that Mexico should be prepared for drone attacks by the U.S.? Those will be major geopolitical issues that we have to also look at in the coming months.
And you have to remember, hindi na Gulf of Mexico yan. Gulf of America daw. So, ang daming,
Well, that's his plan.
California, Mexican California, I guess. I'm Team Mexico, yeah.
All right.
Well, thank you for joining us. As always, geopolitical analyst Richard Haydarian. It's a pleasure. We hope to have you soon again. Now, this is a One News's special coverage of the inauguration of President Donald Trump. We will be back after a short break. Please stay with us. Welcome back. You're still watching our special coverage of the inauguration of U.S. President Donald Trump.
Oh, you've seen the inauguration when he was swearing in.
Wala yung hand niya sa Bible.
Wala yung hand niya sa,
Pero parang,
sa Bible.
based on our discussions also and what we it's not, we shouldn't make too much of it though because
Baka nakalimutan lang yan.
baka verbally kasi Trump has expressed a deep sense of religiousness, di ba? So we don't know.
What do you mean by that?
No, in other words, kasi some are saying bakit yung faith ba
Yeah.
niya is off na ayaw na niya lagay sa Bible, but he's been talking about
But
God
he
non-stop.
brought the Bible himself.
Yes.
I mean,
Baka it's
the Bible, the other Bible is from his mother, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes,
The
yes.
other one is from yung sa US.
Baka nakalimutan lang niya.
We don't know.
Anyway.
All right. Now, several artists took the stage to perform during Donald Trump's inauguration. Opera tenor Christopher Di Macchio opened Trump's inauguration ceremony with a performance of "Oh America." Country music star Carrie Underwood performed "America the Beautiful" in a cappella. Lee Greenwood also made an appearance performing his iconic song "God Bless the United States."
In a
The USA.
cappella.
Oo, kasi parang nagkaroon ng technical difficulties when she was about to sing.
Si Carrie Underwood
so
naman
she decided to just
Diba,
sing
American
a cappella.
Idol siya.
Yeah, maganda naman yung pagkakakanta.
Oo.
But there were a lot of negative comments about her. Kasi parang, performing for President Donald Trump. Well, we'll see. But what does the second Trump presidency mean for Filipino Americans in the U.S.?
Let's weigh in on that with our Phil-Am commentators, Republicans John Jose and Edward Logan, as well as Democrats Gabriel Young and Josh De Leon. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us once
Hi.
again.
So nice to see you
So
again.
nice to see all of you. And it's nice to see that now we have a balance of two Democrats and Republicans.
Thank you so much for that.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here again.
Yes, it's so nice to see you all. But first off, your reaction to Trump's inauguration. Was there anything out of the box? Your thoughts on that?
I think I can go take a stab at it.
Yes, Gabriel.
I was feeling extremely stressed and upset and very angry. And throughout the entire day after watching the inauguration, I had to process my emotions and thoughts in order to understand what I just heard. So, for those who aren't familiar with me, I used to work in the Biden-Harris administration, particularly in the White House Initiative on Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islander. And hearing about the revoking of the executive orders, particularly even for my initiative, and ending DEI programs in government, it made me hurt as a Filipino American, as that was the administration's way of celebrating Asian Americans within the country, especially Filipino American History Month. And so now I'm sort of left throwing my hands up in the air, especially in our work. We did a lot to do leadership development for federal employees, but seeing that now there's a hiring freeze on federal employees, it makes me wonder about what does the future of federal public service look like for Filipino Americans in there, in addition to everything else, such as immigration, the H-1B visas, the overhaul of trade, changing of name, race and gender, just everything. It just really hurt for me to watch and really makes me scared for the next 4 years.
Right.
Yeah, but I'd like to ask John, what was the overall feel you got from Trump's messaging? There are several very controversial things President Trump talked about, from trying to the cancellation of the birthright, aside from the two-gender policy. So what is your take on what he's trying to achieve on day one?
I think you can see, like that he's following through the mandate of the voters that voted for him in this current election. And I'm currently here at the Liberty Ball right now, waiting to see President Trump celebrating one of the 3 inaugural balls this evening. But you can see the sense of excitement in the Republican base that, change is coming. America in decline and not being respected is over. President Trump is there to really stake his second presidency on making sure that America is first in terms of policy and making sure that Americans aren't being forgotten in the world stage and locally as well. As you can see, it was definitely a different type of inaugural when he was inside the rotunda, but as you can see, he's still supportive of all of the folks that are here. Even though how cold it is out here, people have waited 2 hours, 3 hours in line just to be in this celebratory day. So it's been something that the Republican Party and the Republican voters have been waiting for the past 4 years. So we are ecstatic and optimistic for this next 4 years under the President Trump administration.
I want to go back to Josh. You're also a Democrat. I was wondering if you feel the same way as Gabriel did when he was listening to the inauguration or watching the inauguration.
Well, for me, my afternoon was actually not spent in front of the television, but instead in community, because I live here in Los Angeles. And so at the same time that the pageantry is happening in Washington, D.C., we're grappling with the on-the-ground impacts of a failure to address climate change. And so for me, that's really where my heart and my time has been. There is smoke in the air and work to be done here in Los Angeles to grapple with the failures of both Republican and Democratic presidents to properly prevent the scale of the disasters that we're facing today. And so for me, honestly, this is the last thing on my mind. What Trump says, I'm going to deal with that tomorrow, and maybe that stress will come tomorrow morning. But for right now, we're struggling here in LA.
Yeah, but Josh, you're talking about climate change and the effects and all these fires happening, and President Trump signs an executive order withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement and sending the message to the UN. So how do you think this affects this fight?
Well, it's a fight that we're losing, and it's a fight that we might be losing even more quickly, right? And so I think that's part of the struggle here is that, oil companies have known for decades that fossil fuels contribute to climate change, right? They've had that information for a really long time. Insurance companies know that. That's why they keep canceling policies for homeowners in California to Miami and Florida, right? The truth of the matter is that everyone serious-minded understands that climate change is causing incredible harm to our communities, and it's only going to get worse. And the only way for us to actually address that is for there to be not just a whole of government approach in the states, but also a multinational approach to addressing climate change. And leaving the most ambitious climate alliance that exists is simply short-sighted and is a failure and capitulation to the wrong base, which is its true base, the billionaires and the big corporations.
All right, I want to go to Edward Logan as a Republican. Hi there. Good morning from the Philippines. What was your reaction when did you watch the inauguration?
Yeah, actually, I was in the rally yesterday night. It was an amazing event. So again, I'm just going to echo what John said. The American people spoke. Right? So the first thing that we want to tell is really don't forget the Americans, right? Especially a lot of the hurricane victims as well here in North Carolina. They're still being forgotten still, right? There's some political people that's been, Trump said, we will take all these government people who try to persecute because of their political beliefs. That should not happen here in America. Yeah, so that's one thing that we want to make sure that is going to have, stopping the weaponization.
Yeah, so. Edward, it's wonderful you mentioned about that because in his speech, President Trump mentioned about now we will be colorblind and we will be merit-based. Now, mind you, a lot of people, not me, in general, have said that Trump is the #1 racist in America. And now he's saying we will now be colorblind. That's not mine, I'm just for context.
Right.
And now he's saying that we will be, we will be colorblind. Now, do you think this was a good message to start off campaigning himself as a champion for equality among all Americans?
Number one, that is the slogan that the mainstream media uses. So please look at the administration's representation. We have Kash Patel is going to be confirmed as the FBI director, an Indian American, and we have a few more minorities going to be representing the administration. So just wait for the true Americans who will really represent the American people.
Yeah, John was shaking his head.
Yeah, John.
You were about to say something.
Yeah, I think, that narrative is completely ridiculous, to be honest, because if you look at the people that voted for him, the increase of the Hispanic vote and the Black vote, the Asian vote in all of the battleground states has increased, even through the popular vote. So, I think to keep going with that statement is completely going the opposite way of what we're trying to do. President Trump is talking about meritocracy and merit-based for all Americans. There's no race in that when it comes to moving up. I mean, that is the American dream, is working hard as you can and following the rules and making sure that you can find a way to elevate and move up. And so that's what President Trump is trying to move back when it comes to this, and in terms of merit-based, in terms of moving forward, with his proposals in this country. So, to call him racist is just absurd. And I think that should be taken away of context because, he's done more for Black Americans, for Hispanic Americans in the past 4 years. And you can see the mandate that those communities have entrusted in him. So let's just talk about that and talk about even the popular vote. And what we're not talking about is talk about what President Biden did minutes before inauguration of, pardoning his whole family with a blanket pardon.
I understand how you
years.
feel, but I'd like to get, I see cringe on Josh's face, but I'd like to pivot a little from that and ask about your feelings about Trump's attempt on birthright cancellation.
Yeah. What about you, Gabriel? You can.
So Josh,
Josh,
on birthright
Josh.
cancellation,
So on birthright citizenship, for me, that's very scary. So while executive orders have the effect of law, it's important to note that they are not law. And while President Trump just hours or even minutes ago just signed that executive order, there was a judicial case going back to 1898, United States versus Arkham Long. And particularly, that case was a Chinese immigrant or Chinese immigrant's family, where the son was born in the United States, but questioning if, according to the 14th Amendment, if he can have birthright citizenship. And the Supreme Court at the time in 1898 voted 6-2 to keep that clause within the law. Within the 14th Amendment that was created also out of the Civil War for slaves who were born in the United States to grant them citizenship and the right to vote.
That's right.
However, with this overturning of birthright citizenship, while it is important to note that it is targeting a lot of undocumented immigrants who are coming over and having their children here in the United States, it will also impact lots of Filipino Americans who do the same thing too. Also, a lot of folks who are on DACA and are giving birth to their children here as well. And so this is going to create a legal challenge because there is case law precedent to defend birthright citizenship. However, where I can see a path for President Trump to actually make this work is the legal challenges created. States across the country or even civil liberties unions such as the ACLU will come to the Supreme Court and challenge it. However, we know that the Supreme Court right now is four justices conservative, 3 quote-unquote liberal. And so there can be a leaning towards upholding that executive order or that rule of law because there is a history of the Supreme Court, such as with Roe v. Wade being overturning former case law. And so therefore, it is very much possible that birthright citizenship can be ended. And it is a very big fear for me in supporting my community and making sure that even those Filipinos who are moving to the U.S. seeking to do the same thing, not saying that I'm approving undocumented immigration through there, but more so that folks who already have had this process in motion will get it taken away from them. We're seeing it right now at the border that lots of people's immigration appointments were just canceled with CBP-1 being completely halted and removed. And so in terms of what immigration looks like and in terms of birthright citizenship, it is a very much real thing that can happen. And it's not just an EO that can be thrown away.
Yeah. What about you, Josh, before we move forward to the Republicans?
Yeah, and I think, I want to quickly just give some context to John's comments earlier about Trump increasing the vote share for Republicans among voters of color. He might have increased it over his last election, but just to fact check that, 86% of Black voters, 51% of Latino voters, and 55% of Asian voters, and a total of 64% of non-white voters in the United States did not vote for Donald Trump, vote for Kamala Harris instead. So I do want to make clear that the vast majority of non-white voters in America continue to vote Democrat. Now, to Gabriel's point, I think it's really important to talk about the scale of what a mass deportation project would look like, right? 11 million people, that's 3% of the US population are undocumented. You can imagine the amount of human pain that would have to come if Trump was truly serious about launching this agenda. And there are leaks that actually came out recently about plans under the Immigration Customs Enforcement launch massive deportation raids in Chicago starting at 5 a.m. tomorrow to try and catch people on their way to work, right? And so that level of sort of master planning around trying to displace and impact weak people is targeted where people are working, right? There is a a framing that comes a lot from the Republican side that there is immense danger for migrants, from undocumented folks. And yet statistically, according to many studies, you are actually more likely to commit a crime if you are an American-born citizen than if you are an immigrant, right? And that's been peer-reviewed and tested over time, right? And so the question is not, who are we as a community to pick a few examples to speak for the whole, but rather what is the actual broad impact these policies are going to have? I don't really care if Trump is racist or not in his heart. I care about how racist his policies are, and that's really where they think the issue is.
Yeah. So, but do you agree with that? For John and Edward, do you think that this policy, birthright citizenship, is something to be going to be legally challenged, and this is something that Trump won't be able to do?
It will be challenged legally. That's the American legal system. Like a lot of people said that, when Trump was being persecuted with all these legal trials and tribulation, that he will not win a second presidency. So again, that will be in the legal system. But there's a reason why the American people wants this notion of citizen birthright be challenged. So that's why President Trump listened to American people's voice.
Yeah, and on top of Edward's point on that I'd like to add on, and to clarify my statements when it comes to minority communities earlier in voting, yes, overwhelmingly, they still vote democratically, but if you look at the shift from 2016 to 2024, the decline of the Latino voters and the Black voters and Asian voters have gone, in some small parts in the Asian voters have gone down, especially in the Democratic side, and that's why they're losing a lot of these coalition voters. So that's the reality of that. And in terms of the birthright ending, that's not the main priority of what President Trump is trying to do with the mass deportation. He wants to get rid of the criminals, the gang members that were allowed here based on that CBP1 app that you can fill out an appointment while you're already here. President Trump and the American people, according to the latest polls, are supportive of this. So in terms of the mandate of the American people on November 5th, this is one of the priorities, including the economy, that they're going to fix. But so in terms of birthright citizenship, as much of that is a priority of what we've heard so far, I don't think that that's on the top of the list. He's prioritizing those folks that already have illegal criminal records or are causing troubles in those communities. I mean, President Biden still had over 1.1 million people that he was supposed to deport under his administration, where he focused on pardoning his family first before those criminals. So that's the things that, what we have to look at. And I think that President Trump is just following through what he was campaigning on. And that's the things that the American people were supportive of.
I think, John, the issue with the birthright is not so much as the policy itself, but rather the gray areas within this policy. Who will determine, how will it be determined that whose birthrights are to be canceled or not? You were raising your hand. Josh, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I want to quickly fact check Edward for a moment here. He said that's the mandate to end birthright citizenship. Only 28% of Americans actually want a change to birthright citizen policies. So that would be a misrepresentation of the American public, right? I also just want to quickly just ask the four of us here, how many of us would actually want birthright citizenship changed? I do not. I think we should figure out if even the majority of the people in this space, half Democrat, half Republican, would support a change of birthright citizenship. Does anyone want birthright citizenship taken away? I see a head shake. What about John and Edward? Do you actually want it taken away?
Can you repeat that question? Sorry.
Do you support a change in birthright citizenship policies in the U.S.?
I think that that's something to be looked at in a lot of ways, right? There's some ways that are against it for some reasons, and there's some for it as well. So I think that, when it comes to the gray area, it's the Supreme Court that leads up to it, right? And so I think that that's the movement that he's just trying to push through. So it's up to the Congress and Senate. It's not necessarily something he can end on one stroke of a pen.
And sometimes culture change. When it's an old law or old practices, they have to revisit it. It's not always going to be forever. That sometimes culture change it.
Edward, you mentioned about revisiting a law, and I want to pivot a little to another very controversial executive order from Donald Trump, which is the DEI initiatives, which he is planning on canceling, one of which is the two sexes, meaning President Biden signed into law allowing people to have a third sex on your passport and documents. Now, essentially, Trump is canceling this. Now, what is your take on this new law that Trump is trying to introduce and trying to cancel?
Who's it for?
Anyone. Whoever feels like he has...
Oh, I mean, this is one thing that he's been promising in the campaign. So, I mean, as a candidate, you know, that you're looking for from the American people, and he does it on day one, he's following through, you know, like what he's done in 2016. Promises made and promises kept. Like, how are we, you know, mad at a politician for campaigning on something, and then him trying to do something about it on day one, right? So these are the things that the voters in the Republican Party and the people that voted for him is an important issue to them. And so for them, for the base and for the Republican voters that, you know, as supported this, they're happy to see that something's being done about this, because those folks, especially the parents, are concerned more about this issue when it comes to, you know, DEI and the two and having the third extra sex on the passport, right? So, you know, those were things that he promised on the campaign stuff, and he's just following through it on day one.
Yeah, and John, just to add with John, that will also go effect within the women in sports, right? Where I have a daughter who would like to have a scholarship in college. So therefore, that is another beauty of this administration. He promised, he delivered. So that's another thing that we want to continue to see changes.
Gabriel, I'd like to ask you about this issue, because it's a very contentious issue. Some are saying that it's a step backward for other countries who are trying to take a step forward in terms of inclusion.
Yes, absolutely. Because if you look at the LGBTQIA plus community, it is not just about sexuality, but it is about healthcare, let alone public healthcare. Because when we also look at mental health initiatives, for example, some folks, and Ben Shapiro has said this too, we need to be providing those folks with the mental health care that if they are struggling with their own gender identity, we need to provide them with the therapy in order for them to succeed. And a lot of Western countries throughout the world are doing this as well. And on top of that, with us just focusing on our own Filipino identity, even going before the Spanish colonized us Filipinos, in our pre-colonial history, were very gender fluid. There were people who would be feminine, there were people who would be masculine, and there were people who didn't identify with such a gender. But then to introduce rigid standards on what a man and a woman is, essentially just overlooks the science behind it all, and especially the queer science behind it all, and that history that it holds. And so, in my opinion, this is actually going to end up hurting itself, because people will still feel that they are not the gender that they are, or this despite being born into the sex they are, and therefore their mental health will be worse. Maybe bullying is going to increase, and therefore more hate incidents, let alone in homophobic, transphobic communities across the country, are going to increase. And the more that folks end up not being able to express themselves, the more that they are going to have lacking access to health care.
So Gabriel, I'd like to ask a question. Should we then be more specific with regards to how to attack this problem? A lot of these issues were raised from sports. Now, they were saying, could you imagine if LeBron James one day identifies as a woman and decides to join the WNBA? Now, he would be taking away opportunities for other women. So how do you think then we should balance out the rights of the women, and also to make sure everyone is covered?
Definitely, literature out there actually talks about sports and its entire motivation and history. Since the start of sports, each of us have different physicalities, we have different body shapes, we have different heights, and it's a matter of using our talents against each other, and even using our physical traits against each other. So there are two ways that we can approach this from the physical manner. The first one is we make sports co-ed. Obviously, that can lead to a lot of discrepancies, especially if, let's say, LeBron James dunks on Reese Witherspoon or something. But the other, not Reese Witherspoon, Angel Reese. Yeah. The other thing to it would be defining physical requirements to participate in the sport. If people are afraid, saying that a 6'9" LeBron James is going to go against someone who's 5'10", then let's cap the different leagues that we have. Just like we have a little league and then we eventually have a major league baseball. We have opportunities to make sure that people can be physically matched up to make it a more equal sport. If everyone is talking about equality, there are solutions out there for this, but then it's a matter of getting the political will and getting folks to be on board with it.
I see, John, you have something to say, John?
Yeah, we're talking about a 6'9" LeBron James, but we're not talking about the middle school kids and the high school kids that are being forced to share lockers with some of these folks. So, I mean, the parents are the ones that are very concerned about this issue. I mean, just to piggyback off Edward's, point about his daughter, like how ridiculous would that be that you're going to be the school that's going to be the one that's making the choice to combine a male and a scientifically female, teammates or classmates in one locker room is preposterous to a lot of the parents that are in the communities across America. That's why this was such a big issue for parents to take back the education rights and to be a part of this. So, I mean, I'd push this on to Edward on what he thinks on what other people in the community thinks about this and why it's such an important issue in the Republican community.
Yeah, not just only a Republican issue, because some mothers who have daughters who are inspiring to ensure that women's right will be respected, right? In terms of that scholarships, that Title IX, that was the original intent to help women, separate them to get scholarship in competitive sports.
I understand that.
Yeah, Josh.
Final point on that. I agree with the whole, like the Tagalog and the Filipinos are free fluid when it comes to pre-colonization. That's why we don't have any pronouns in Tagalog, right? But now we're being forced to, even in the Philippine schools now, you're supposed to use he, she, and English and colonizer pronouns to be spoken in the Philippines. So like that to me is even hilarious to be talking about, like, using pronouns in Tagalog when we don't even use them in our own home language.
Yes, Josh, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I want to be very clear. Trans people are people. Trans folks deserve rights. And the way that this conversation has unfolded for the last few minutes, honestly, is very disturbing to me, because we're talking as if these are folks who don't have their own lives, their own conditions, that are in our communities. Many of my friends that I was just working with today, serving Angelenos who are impacted by fires, are trans organizers and community members. And when I was in the Philippines, many of the best community leaders that I met are trans leaders, right? And so the scapegoating of trans people and this straw man argument that sports are the defining issue, like the rate of violence against trans folks in the United States and across the world is incredibly high. I find it incredibly frustrating that we're spending so much time talking about who's dunking on whom and not about the fact that we are seeing an increase in the potential risk, in the potential targeting, the potential jailing of trans folks, that we see this across the world. And my energy is on people's lives, right? And it's a frustrating thing when that's not the first part of the conversation about a major part of our minority community here in the United States and around the world.
Right. For Gabrielle.
I also want to back up Josh there too. That one thing that is, we're talking about lockers, we're talking about bathrooms, and a lot of places across the country in schools are making more unisex locker rooms or bathrooms, or they're having some people who identify as such go in and then some people identify as such go out. And so there are solutions to these, and it's a matter of bringing it back down to the local level, to the school boards, for them to decide and for them to gather in conversation, rather, as Josh is saying, scapegoat. Because the more that we talk about people as items, we call them trans folks, the more that we just see them as objects or political tokens, the more that we increase the violence against them. And so I really just want to plus one what Josh said there. We really need to humanize this conversation.
Right.
Yeah, you just need the Republican point there, because we just want to bring this to the school level and the state level and not become a federal mandate on it. So I'm agreeing with you on bringing it down to the state level.
Right.
Thank you for
And plus,
that.
the majority of American people are not violent people, right? They just want to make sure that everybody be respected. Also, that girls have the more opportunity in sports.
Right.
Not taking away from them.
I don't know about this country not being a violent country because there's a large literature of
No, I
transphobic
said
hate crimes out
American
there.
people right
Yep,
now.
American people are violent people, and as we can see with anti-Asian hate.
That's
Wow.
your opinion. I would
Wow.
say that's not my.
I don't think
my
it's an opinion when there's that published literature out there and classes taught on it. We can see with the Watsonville riots, for example, that Filipino Americans were targeted by Americans, and even today, we see Americans being attacked.
We're not
and many
saying
of these
there's
are just Asians.
also bad
And it's like,
people and
oh,
bad actors. That's different.
Anyway, let's move on a little. Now we're talking about you were mentioning Asian hate. Now Trump's has had several rhetorics on minorities. Now, how should Filipino Americans position themselves now in this new administration, coming from the rhetorics of Donald Trump? Go ahead, Josh.
I mean, when it comes to Asian hate,
Anyone, go. Yeah.
You've seen more Asians in this administration than Biden can even get one Asian as an acting cabinet secretary. He's already got the first Asian comms director. He's going to have the first Asian FBI director. He's got Vivek Ramaswamy a part of all of this. And so, to me, that's just the narrative that you guys need to switch out from and look at it as a whole point. I mean, like me, myself, I've been a part of the RNC as the National Director of Asian American Engagement. It's the first Filipino there. So there's a lot of opportunities that the Republican Party has been pushing for this. And that is why we've done so well when it comes to earning the minority vote in this past election.
Yeah, but I want to move forward to this question. For Gabrielle, you mentioned earlier that you worked hard for some of the policies that only to be overturned by the executive orders that were signed earlier by President Donald Trump. So what happens now? And I guess in what ways can the Filipino-American community amplify your voice, its voice, and advocate for its interests under the Trump administration?
So, a lot of grassroots and nonprofit communities across the United States, and shout out to Josh, for example. Josh is organizing over in LA with these nonprofits, are actually getting together and finding out how can we improve from this. As you saw earlier, firstly, I want to apologize on creating a tense environment.
No.
I'm sorry, John. I'm sorry, Edward, because it's that type of rhetoric. I recognize I'm growing from it as well. That really sparks that heat and then the division across. So a lot of grassroots nonprofits need to learn how to find the common wins and find how to have constructive dialogue with one another, even though there's a lot of intergenerational differences that are being had. And I will say, even though John and I are going back and forth, we had Spam Silog a few months ago over in DC and had a genuine conversation about that. And so in terms of finding the policies, it's just a matter of learning how to talk to each other once again, learning how to sit in a room and not let our emotions get in the way, but try to understand each other. One of the principles of constructive dialogue we use over here at UC Berkeley, for example, is listen to understand, not to respond. And so if the Filipino community can figure out what can we have as common wins, then we can create that progress during this time. Of course, if we feel that there is a policy that is divisive towards the Filipino community, I heard today earlier, one thing that made me afraid was Trump talking about education that makes people hate themselves or makes people ashamed of who they are. And I'm talking about ethnic studies in this case and talking about the history of Filipino Americans. And so if there's a policy such as that to not teach Filipino American history or the Asian American contributions, then I believe that's where us Filipino Americans should come in and make sure that we're uplifting. Under Trump 1, Trump did celebrate Filipino American History Month. There were Filipino American appointees, but it's a matter of making sure that, again, as Edward was saying and John was saying, that our representation in government is not just stuck with Democrats, but it's also with Republicans as well.
That's right.
And so even though there's a federal hiring freeze, making sure that our community is still appointed to these positions. There's currently no Filipino American appointed right now. And so it's a matter of making sure that that
There will be. It's coming.
yeah, incoming, crossing our
Right.
fingers. Like we had Nani Coloretti, who was a great deputy director of
Oh.
Office of Management and Budget in the Biden White House.
Well,
And
that's
so
good to
just
hear.
making sure that we have that tier of Filipino American service also under a Trump administration.
Yeah, I'd like to.
Seat at the table.
Yeah, I'd like to ask Josh. Do you think moving forward, do you see maybe a better relationship between Republicans and Democrats with regards to trying to position to make America great again? Is that a possibility?
Well, I don't know if everyone agrees with what great looks like or when America was great or what that looks like. But I want to say a couple things real quick about the questions y'all have been asking.
Yeah.
You know, it's not just about who is in these offices, but it's also how do they carry out the issues and represent our communities, right? There's a quote from this Black writer named Zoronia Hurston that says, "Not all skin folk are kinfolk." And so I don't just want Filipinos or Asian Americans in elected office or in appointed positions. I also want them to be responsive to the needs of our communities, right? And so one thing that we're recognizing is there is a need for us in the nonprofit and in the activist community to actually create networks of protection in the event that we get targeted in different ways, such as if Filipinos get targeted for deportation as part of the 370K to 1 million undocumented Filipinos in the US, right? And so we're actually starting something called the Tanggol Migrante, or Defend Migrants campaign, which is a network of organizations and community leaders trying to make sure that Filipinos are protected, know their rights, and are able to be aware of the enveloping crisis that will be mass deportation if it comes to pass. In terms of unity, I think, you know, there's a lot of questions about what will the impact of policies under Trump be for working class folks. And I think that's really where I want to find unity. And my concern is that when it comes to actual policy choices that will be made, that unity is not going to be possible because of the political ideology is going to create the wrong choices. For example, Trump really wants to unveil a lot of tariffs. And yet we know through economics and history that tariffs typically pass on costs to consumers and rarely actually are effective in short-term benefits for working class folks. We're going to see more prices go up on day-to-day items if we go into a trade war or tariff war with another country, right? And so I think for me, the idea of unity is difficult when the philosophy of what makes America great and the policy choices and the harm that will come from them are going to be so impactful.
I wish Josh
ahead,
and Gabrielle that you will wish to be the best for the American people, right? American economy. That's number one, that not politically attuned average American people are looking for right away.
But Edward, what do you
Not everybody have resources. So that's why I also feel your pain in terms of going to your communities to help those, need. And that's what a lot of the American people voted. Number one issue is economy.
Well, Edward, what do you think needs to be done with the economy? There's different interpretations of how to approach this. What do you think Trump needs to focus on? That wasn't already mentioned.
Yeah, so my background is in the business as well, in litigation, federal litigation. I do a lot of government contracts. Really, number one is to ensure that giving empowerment to all his political appointee to ensure that the policy will be trickle down. For example, the gas is really number one because it's impacting everything for the cost of goods. When you have a higher gas, that will pass on to all the other parts of the economy in terms of like the food, so therefore we need to address that type of particular topic. And that's why I think he declared it as an emergency.
Yes.
That's why the word emergency.
Yeah, John, Edward said emergency. What do you think about Trump saying, let's drill, baby?
I don't love it, but let me turn back to Edward real quick because he's saying that gas costs are really important here. So what's the policy you recommend to actually impact that? Do you want price fixing on oil prices? Do you want price fixing at the gas pump? Like, what are the concrete policies you would want Trump to do to reduce the cost of gas for everyday consumers?
Use all the possible sources or methods to ensure that we have gas. Well, they said some frackings are bad, something is good, right? That's another policy debate that we can use to say, is that an option for us to reduce the cost?
Yeah, you were shaking your head. Yeah, John.
Just a couple points on that. I think the two priorities President Trump is trying to do as well when it comes to the is to continue the tax cuts that he's had in 2016 that they passed, and that put a lot more money in American people's pockets in those 4 years. And that's why people remember how good those times was in that. So that's what they're trying to get back to in terms of the economy. And then in terms of the gas, I think his point on that is he just doesn't want us for us to keep buying our oil from other nations where they're taking advantage of us so much in terms of cost, in terms of controlling how much we can buy and controlling all of that. Trump just wants us to be independent from all of those folks that might have some connections with us in terms of putting a detriment in the American economy. So that is, I think, the terms of what President Trump is trying to do. In terms of tariffs, it's a negotiating tactic, right? Still, some parts of the tariffs that Trump put in place during his administration, Biden still continued to use. So, at some of those points, I agree with tariffs. But, in terms of this, President Trump is a negotiator at heart and a deal maker. So a lot of this is just putting things in front. And, of course, he's wild and can be big-spirited when it comes to this, but there's also fine print that comes down to this that's going to be worked out by his cabinet secretaries and the American people when it comes to Congress, right? So those are, I think, some of the highlights that he's trying to look at. So for us to really deep dive into it is kind of premature because we haven't seen what he's going to really roll out when it comes to that.
Gabriel,
And one classic example,
yeah,
just to add, about the tax on the tips, right? Tips, taxing the tips. So when we took out last week for my mother-in-law's birthday, the people we talk say we don't want to be paying taxes on the tips that we're getting. So that is an easy that the people can achieve right away.
Yeah, well, there's so much to talk about, but in parting, since we're nearing the end of the show, I'd like to ask everyone their opinion on this, since a lot of people also on the Philippines are trying to figure out how we will be affected by a Trump presidency. How do you think this impacts the Filipinos right here where we are? Gabriel, let's start with you.
Yep, so one of the biggest fears of Trump, and talk about defense spending, I heard Hadrian talk about it earlier, was if Trump will keep up his mutual alliances that has been historically. Right now I'm seeing, even in our comment section right now on the show, that people see that the United States is the big brother to the Philippines. And Hadrian said as well, if Taiwan is Ukraine, then Philippines is Poland. And so that becomes the big question. Will Donald Trump come to the Philippines' defense? But at the same time, if we look over at Ukraine and we look at NATO, Trump wants to pull out of Ukraine. Does that mean he wants to pull out of Taiwan? And then if he pulls out of Taiwan, does that mean he wants to pull out of the Philippines too? And so that becomes the biggest question on where does defense spending, even going back into it on why they want to do it in the first place, is that the United States does outspend almost all the other NATO members in GDP spending towards that defense. And there's a lot of fear, and especially Donald Trump talked about it, in trying to not get into wars, or we're spending more of the defense budget on other countries' foreign borders than our own, when we realize that we all have mutual and shared enemies, and we're all in this as a commune, as an giant international community. And so going back to how will it impact the Filipino people, it's a matter of, again, will Donald Trump come to the Philippines' defense? I sure hope he does. At least it looks that he will. But also, we don't know with the aggression with China as well upcoming, or the People's Republic of China, I should say.
Just to add on that, if you look at Ambassador Bagram Waldis has already met with the president down in Mar-a-Lago, and even from him, he said that all indications are still coming, that the support's still going to be ironclad and it's still going to stay the same. Marco Rubio is going to be the next Secretary of State, and he's promised, and he's had good relationships with the members of Congress in the Philippines that understands that the Philippines is a frontline ally when it comes to the South Pacific and the West Philippine Sea area. So I am very optimistic when it comes to that. If you like the heritage paper that Richard was referring to in your last program, has suggested that the Americans are willing to support the Philippines and also provide them with weapons and fast boats and Typhoon missiles and all this. But the Philippines has also had to do a little bit of their part and increase their defense budget a little bit, right? And so in terms of that, from President Trump's standpoint, America first, it's not only just giving other countries charity, but how do they find themselves to defend for our, like, as a Filipino, we have to, Filipino American like myself as well, I encourage our government to increase our defense budget, not only depend on foreign superpowers to help us out. We have to take this upon ourselves and protect our own sovereign land as well. So I think when they see that the United States is willing to and able to help us out when it comes to weapons or whatever support that we may need to defend ourselves as well.
That's right. Josh, how do you think President Trump will enforce the Mutual Defense Treaty? There's a lot of interpretation with regards to if it's Republican or Democrats.
A lot of gray zones.
Yeah, a lot of gray areas in the deal.
Yeah, I think ultimately, I and probably none of us here know what's going on in Trump's head from Monday to Friday in terms of foreign policy and how he's going to approach it. But I think what I am concerned about is the fact that the militarization that's happening in the Philippines does have an impact beyond simply creating more, bases and military readiness for the Philippines. It also has an impact on the people in the Philippines, right? We know that there's a lot of indigenous communities that have been displaced, and a lot of poor, low-income fisherfolk, mangingisda, manggagawa, and magsasaka in the different parts of the Philippines, right? Farmers and workers who are getting displaced out of their lands due to the increase in military spending that are building bases. And so I think one of the concerns really is this militarization going to impact working class Filipinos and poor Filipinos in the countryside in ways that Trump's not thinking about, right? So we as Filipinos need to be the ones advocating for the fact that any increase in funding or militarization from the US and the Philippines, it can't be done at the expense of the Filipino people, right? And that's something I'm concerned about, that there really isn't any cognizance of that in the new White House coming in.
We have a breaking...
before we let you go, guys, we would like to ask
also
your
Edward
opinion
later
on
on,
this. Yeah, because there were a lot of executive orders that were signed today, one of which is the pulling out of U.S. from the Paris
climate
deal.
agreement, yeah.
But this time around, Trump signs order to exit World Health Organization, or WHO. It says, WHO taking unfair payments from the U.S., criticizing WHO handling of COVID-19 pandemic. So we all know that withdrawal may put WHO health emergency programs at risk.
So
thoughts on this?
We'd like to get your insights on this, guys.
Yeah. Very quickly.
Yeah, number one, as a negotiator, President Trump said before, when he left the office, President Biden, former President Biden, couldn't take also 39 million as the funding that needs to be put there. But what he did, he actually spend more money to the WHO organization, right? So that's the thing that we need to ensure, proper negotiation of where the money properly allocated. And that's why I think American people said, when you have money that is it's not infinite, you need to prioritize your spending.
Yeah. What about you?
We saw the reaction.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Gabriel. Do you think this is just a negotiating tactic to force WHO
you agree with Edward?
to make a line item of what they need to spend on?
Well, we can't hear you, Gabriel.
We can't hear you, Gabriel.
Oops, sorry, Zoom University failed. Just another fact out there that, again, under President Trump, the U.S.'s deficit has increased much more under him than it did under Biden. And then under Biden, Republicans didn't even want to raise the debt ceiling, and so was always just trying to get us stuck in the everlasting trap of the United States is spending too much, when in reality, we were decreasing spending, but it was just very hard. So just want to fact check that in terms of where does the money go. Number two, in terms of the World Health Organization, let's reel us back into, again, what was going on when Biden came into office. Biden came into office during the COVID-19 pandemic, when international cooperation to contain a worldwide pandemic was so crucial, and therefore lots of spending went into it. If you want to solve a problem, sometimes you got to throw the money at it, and eventually, lo and behold, COVID-19 ended up stopping. And so can we say that, hey, now that there's no pandemic, it's great to pull out of the World Health Organization? Going back to that Don Lemon interview that he did with Elon Musk about doctors of sorts, and he was saying that, well, we're trying to make sure it will not happen. Well, it's the same thing, that we should be funding organizations, especially public health organizations, that can make sure that future healthcare decisions do international cooperation. can be done. And it is not as if the World Health Organization is an inefficient spender. They just allocate the funds, put it together, and bring it out to the organizations and sites across the world that really needs it. And so it's just another tool for the United States to really make sure that we are being that best country that Trump is saying that we are to be. But pulling out of international organizations is just not the way to go.
All right. Thank you so much, guys, for your time.
Truly
Such
an interesting conversation.
fruitful discussion.
Hey,
a little
guys,
bit heated, but
that's the beauty of
anyway.
democracy. It's wonderful to be able to talk about
And
this.
hope to see you guys again. For
Truly
more.
a pleasure. We're looking forward to a new era, hopefully, for the U.S. And we're rooting for you
Take
guys.
care.
Thank you, John, Jose,
Yes.
Edward,
And
Logan.
Josh, he's in LA.
Josh De Leon in LA, we're praying for you, and Gabriel Yang, thank you for the time you've spent with us here on our program.
Daghang salamat. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was nice. That's the
Yeah.
beauty of democracy.
I know. But thank you for joining us today. But before we go, One News would like to thank Ms. Bing Cardenas Brannigan. And she's our contact in the Washington, D.C. And she also helped us during the whole election process in the U.S. Thank you so much.
Made life easier for us here on One News.
You can see her. There's a picture with Jovi.
Yeah, and that, that wraps up our special coverage of the inauguration of U.S. President Donald Trump.
Join us again tomorrow as we go back to our original programming, Brunch. I'm Angela Lagunsad Castro.
I'm Angelo Castro III. We are One News.
All sides, all the time.